Have you ever felt like you are in a rat race? Like you are trying to get to the end and it just seems to be pushed out farther and farther away? Or maybe you do have goals that you want to hit and you have hit them, and it turns out that they're not as satisfying as you thought they would be before you got there. I think that the majority of people actually can feel this or experience it in some way, shape, or form more than we would like to admit. See, one of the biggest problems that we have, especially here in America, is that people are dissatisfied or discontent because there are certain levels of status, money, fame that we want to get to, especially here in the city that I live in Miami, Florida. Everything around us is about what you have and what you do and who your friends are. But the reality is, what if I told you that being truly content was not dependent on any of the things that you own, any of the friends that you have, or the money that is in your account? We know that those things are here today and gone tomorrow. So I have some people that I think that we should learn from. We learn from all different kinds of people, right? We can learn from people who are still living or people who have passed away and have left us good writings. So, two of the people that I actually want to look at are people that you may or may not know. One of them is the Apostle Paul, which needs no introduction and comes straight out of the Bible. The other one is Jeremiah Burroughs, and Jeremiah Burroughs is a Puritan. One of the reasons that we are going to be looking at these two men is because I believe that they have a lot of wisdom and insight to offer us on the whole idea of being content and what that looks like. We'll be looking at the book of Philippians, where Paul is writing to the church in Philippi, and he's in jail when he's writing this letter. And then after we've gone over the book of Philippians, specifically chapter 4, I want to look at Jeremiah Burroughs' book called Contentment, Prosperity, and God's Glory. He has some practical applications that we can listen to and apply to our own life if we desire to live a life that is truly content. So the first thing I want to do is look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 to 13. And Paul, like I said earlier, is writing to the church in Philippi from jail. And this is what he says, starting in verse 11 of chapter 4. Paul says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need." And then he finishes in verse 13 and he says, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." This is an important passage to consider when we're talking about the whole idea of what it is to be truly content. Paul learned to be content, and that's a big deal because Paul wrote majority of the New Testament. We would consider him to be a beast, and he's taught us so much from the Bible, right? But Paul says that he learned in whatever situation to be content in verse 11. And so Paul was not always content in all things. This is something that he had to learn how to do. He matured in his ability to consider it well with him in all circumstances. And so Paul's life and all the difficult things that have happened to him should serve to teach us that sometimes we might have to go through difficult things too in order to learn to be content in all circumstances. But here are just some things that Paul experienced, good and bad. So here are 5 difficult things that Paul experienced. Paul was imprisonment, which is where he was when he wrote the book of Philippians. Paul experienced beatings and physical abuse. This happened more than once, and on one of the occasions, they actually thought that he was dead. Paul experienced shipwrecks and different kinds of dangers like that, which happened to him more than once as well. And Paul also experienced rejection and betrayal even by those who are close to him. Lastly, we know that Paul in Second Corinthians experiences what he describes is like a thorn in his flesh. And what he's trying to say there is simply there was this thing that was bothersome to him, and he actually prayed to the Lord that God would take it away from him. But it kept Paul humble. And so that was something that Paul just had to live with. We know that Paul, based on his life, didn't experience exactly a life of roses and butterflies. So we can know and trust that Paul is a guy that speaks from experience when he says he has learned to be content in all circumstances, even difficult ones. 5 good things that Paul has experienced in life is first and foremost his radical conversion, right? Paul used to be a Pharisee and one who attacked the church and killed Christians, and God saved a man like that. That should give us hope. But the second thing is, Paul was called to be an apostle, right? Paul experienced miracles and healings. Paul wrote much of the New Testament, and Paul had a deep joy and peace, clearly, that he's saying in Philippians chapter 4, through Jesus Christ. And Paul also experienced abundance and wealth. Paul used to be a high ranking official, and this meant that you were living a good life. He wasn't exactly somebody who was in desperate need. And so Paul has experienced both good and bad, which gives more evidence to verse 12 in chapter 4. Paul says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. So Paul has had every experience, good and bad. He's had wealth and he has had poverty. But he says he has learned to be content in all circumstances. That is an interesting statement because for you and I, and the way that we are tempted to think now, we think that only contentment is something that is hard to have when you are in a season of want, right? Maybe you don't make as much money as you would like, or you are struggling in some of your friendships, or in some of your family households. And although all those things, rightfully so, can be difficult to deal with, Paul is saying he learned how to be content in all circumstances, which is not just moments of want and need, but also moments of prosperity and abundance. Paul is saying that he learned to be content even when he had a lot. That tells us that the only reason somebody has to be content is because their identity is found in Jesus. And that takes us to the last verse, verse 13, which is probably the most taken out of context verse in the history of all the Bible, which is, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. See, the context of that verse is not that you will be able to accomplish your wildest dreams because of Jesus who gives you strength. Though, if you are a person who has been able to accomplish your wildest dreams, that is still most definitely by God's grace. But the point of this verse is that whether you are in a season of abundance and prosperity or in a seasons of need or want, you are stable because your identity and your strength comes from Jesus. So you are able to, in all circumstances, whether you have a lot or a little, still be satisfied because Jesus is who satisfies you. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to read a portion of the book that I told you about from Jeremiah Burroughs. Jeremiah Burroughs was a Christian, godly man who actually, at the time of writing this book, was in a season of experiencing prosperity and abundance. it actually wasn't out of a season of want. It was out of a season of having a lot that he wrote the book, Contentment, Prosperity, and God's Glory. And so here are three different short sections that I want to read to you that I think will be challenging for us to hear and also applicable for everyday life. So here's the first one. Jeremiah Burroughs says, "It is a better lesson for one to learn how to honor God in fullness than it is to learn how he can get full. It is better to know how to honor God with those good things that I have than to know how I can get more. It's better to know how I might behave myself in the enjoyment of those good things God has given me than to know how to get more of those good things." So, a good question for us to think about in regards to what we just read out of the book is, do you desire more than you already have for the sake of having it? Or do you desire more for the sake of giving God more glory? Are you satisfied with what you already have, or are you wanting more just to indulge more in those things, or in money, or in status? The second thing that I want us to look at in the book is this. He writes, "Many men's spirits are like a bee. When it comes to sting, it thrusts its stinger so far in that it cannot be taken out. So the bee leaves the stinger in. Likewise, our hearts are so riveted into our possessions that we cannot part with them. When God is ready to take them away from us, they are so dear to us that they cannot be removed. That's the reason that people cry out the way that they do. That's why they complain that they are undone and they wring their hands, even if they have lost only part of their estate, and even if they still have a great part of it still remaining. This is a sign that they did not learn how to be full when they had their fullness." Here's a good application question. Are you holding on to something so tight that if it was removed, your whole world would fall apart? Are you content with the abundance that you have right now, or are you a person that wants more and you don't really have a reason for wanting more? You are just stuck in the rat race of always seeking more money, more things, more status. The third is probably one of the most convicting. It says, "A poor man might have just as much inclination to satisfy his lusts, but he must attend to his work, or his family will starve. But a man who is in full condition has room enough to satisfy his lusts. He can go out in the morning and stay till midnight and do this from the beginning of the week to the end of it and still not be in want." This is probably one of the most convicting for me personally, because what Jeremiah Burroughs is saying here is that though some of us may be in need or in want, God has provided just enough that we have to keep working every day and work hard in order to provide and make a living. But what Jeremiah Burroughs is saying, is it possible that God is keeping you from wealth because rather than it helping you, it may actually destroy you? We never think of riches and wealth in this way. We only ever think of riches and wealth as a good thing, but we never think of it as something that can ultimately lead to your own destruction. So something good to think about is, are you honest with yourself in your ability to handle abundance? Has there ever been a time in your life where you have been blessed with much and it turns out you didn't deal with those things as well as you thought you would? Or maybe you are somebody who is handling things well and you haven't been blessed with abundance. Well, we know that the Bible says, just as the Apostle Paul told us in Philippians chapter 4, that those people, and just like all people, are to be content in all circumstances. And how does this happen? You are content because your identity is found in Jesus. There's no other way that somebody can truly find contentment, that somebody can truly find satisfaction unless they find it in Jesus. And so I hope that's helpful for you today and that you don't feel like you have to run this rat race of making more money and increasing your status or having all these high status friendships in order that you can be more satisfied and more content. I do want to say that those things aren't bad in and of themselves. There's nothing wrong with striving to get a job that pays more money, to have a certain lifestyle, or to provide for your family as you would like to. There's nothing bad with having an abundance of friendships. And there's nothing bad with having nice things at all. We see plenty of examples of Christians in the Bible who had a lot of wealth and nice things and handled it well, even though those who handled it well are definitely in the minority. What we do see more in the Bible is people who have been given a lot, and what happens is it ultimately leads to their destruction. So, a new way to think about wealth is maybe you don't have it because if you did, your life would be destroyed. And if you do come upon wealth, think about this: the money and the things are not what satisfies you. Jesus is. So find your contentment in Him. And if you guys want to read this book and you think it's helpful, then you can go ahead and go to the link in my description and you can purchase it there. That'll be super helpful because I have the Amazon affiliates. And so that will help the page and the account and myself to be able to do more interesting videos. And if you want to check out my podcast, it's more long form, then you can go to Strangers to Saints podcast on YouTube. If you like this video, like, subscribe, share with a friend, make sure you comment, and give me more ideas on what you would like to hear. I love to be able to talk to you guys and to cover all things that the Bible speaks on. So thank you guys so much. You can check out our website, strangerstosaints.com. I'll see you guys later.